Hey everyone, welcome back, or maybe welcome for the first time, to Bedtime History Tales. Tonight we're diving into something that sounds scandalous, mysterious, and even a bit cinematic. But, spoiler alert, it's more about long hallways, grumpy archivists, and paperwork than anything action-packed. Yes, we're discussing the Vatican's secret archives. Or, if you want to sound fancy and make your dinner guests a little uncomfortable, the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum Vaticanum. In Latin, that means the Pope's private filing cabinet. Before you start to panic, secretum doesn't mean secret, like knights with flaming swords guarding forbidden manuscripts. It just means private. Kind of like how you don't give your neighbor your Netflix password. The Vatican wasn't really hiding things from the world, they were just keeping their records. Still, the phrase Vatican Secret Archives has all the appeal of a Dan Brown novel. Let's be honest, when the Catholic Church says "don't look," people immediately want to check it out. So get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe enjoy some chamomile tea, unless you prefer red wine at midnight, no judgment here. Let's take a stroll through the strange, cluttered, and slightly dusty world of the Vatican Archives. So, what exactly are the Vatican Archives? Picture the world's biggest hoarder, but instead of newspapers piled high and a few cat skeletons under the couch, this hoarder has letters, maps, papal bulls, treaties, account books, and at one point, a bill for Michelangelo's paint supplies. That's the Vatican Archives, which spans about 53 miles of shelving. Yes, miles. If you tried to jog through them, you'd be exhausted before you even reached the good stuff, assuming you could jog at all. The Vatican doesn't just let random YouTubers in with a GoPro. Most of the shelves contain what you'd expect from a millennium of paperwork. Receipts, letters, dusty ledgers nobody asked for. Think of them as the medieval version of Excel spreadsheets. But occasionally, you find something that makes you think, okay, maybe this is a bit unusual. For example, Henry VIII's "Please Don't Divorce Me" letters. One famous document in the archives is a letter from Henry VIII. Yes, that Henry, the one with the wives, the beheadings, and a general lack of calm. He wrote to the Pope in 1530, basically pleading for permission to divorce Catherine of Aragon and Mary Anne Boleyn. The letter was signed by 83 English nobles and clergymen, which sounds impressive until you remember they all signed because Henry could have executed them if they didn't. Now, the fun part. Henry's handwriting looks like a child went wild with ink, and the Pope didn't exactly say yes. Thus, the whole Church of England situation. In the archives, it's reduced to a few messy sheets of paper with scrawled signatures. An entire religious division? Just another item in the filing cabinet. Galileo's trial records. Then there's Galileo. You know, the Earth goes around the sun guy. Today, that's second-grade science. Back then, it was apparently heresy. The archives hold the original transcripts from his 1633 trial, where he was essentially forced to say, "Fine, fine, the earth is completely still, sure." He was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. It's oddly comforting to know that even brilliant people can get caught up in disagreements with bureaucrats. Though in Galileo's case, it wasn't just an annoying HOA fine, it was the Inquisition. Tomato, tomato. The Pope versus the King of Spain, Petty Edition. Another interesting find, letters from Pope Leo X to Spain's King Charles V. Imagine the tone of a passive-aggressive work email, but written on parchment. Lots of flowery Latin boils down to, "Stop conquering everything without asking first." Of course, Charles ignored him. History shows us that popes are skilled at writing letters, while kings are often good at ignoring them. But is there really hidden information?
Let's be honest. Most of the dark Vatican secrets people whisper about, like proof that aliens visited in the 12th century or that Jesus secretly married Mary Magdalene and moved to Provence, They're not sitting on shelf 37 beside papal grocery lists. The archives aren't a conspiracy buffet. They're just well-organized storage. You'd probably find fewer demons and more tax returns. That said, there are restricted documents. Some files are still sealed for reasons like the people mentioned are still alive, or too politically sensitive. This, of course, makes them even more intriguing. Nothing gets a historian's heart racing like the words "classified until 2040. The Index of Forbidden Books. Then we have one of my personal favorites, the Index Librorum Prohibitorum. The church maintained a list of books you weren't supposed to read. This list started in 1559 and lasted until 1966. So technically, your grandparents could have been considered sinners just for owning a copy of Les Miserables. The list contained everything from heretical pamphlets to, at one point, Galileo's work again. Poor guy, couldn't catch a break. Even Descartes made the list. Apparently, I Think Therefore I Am was too controversial for the Vatican. Michelangelo's receipts. Yes, buried in the archives are receipts from Michelangelo's work on the Sistine Chapel. It's like finding Leonardo da Vinci's grocery list. He billed the Pope for items like paint, brushes, and scaffolding. Even Renaissance geniuses had to get reimbursed for supplies. Imagine Michelangelo standing in line at HR with a crumpled receipt saying, "Yes, I bought 40 gallons of ultramarine. It's for God's ceiling." Napoleon stole the archives and lost them again. Fun fact, in 1810, Napoleon thought, you know what I need? All of the Vatican's paperwork. Of course he did. He had the archives transported to Paris in 3,000 crates. If moving apartments is tough, imagine being the poor person tasked with carrying centuries of papal tax records across the Alps. Later, the French decided this was excessive and returned some of it. Well, about 4,000 documents are still missing. They could still be in a Paris attic, lost forever, or maybe some random French antique dealer is using a papal bull as wrapping paper. Why do people still care? So why do we keep being fascinated by the Vatican archives? It's simple. It's the mix of secrecy, religion, and power. If your neighbor says, "Don't go in my garage," you probably wouldn't care. But if the Pope says, "Don't go in my garage," suddenly you think he's hiding aliens, Jesus' diary, and the Ark of the Covenant. In reality, it's just very old, very expensive filing cabinets. But because of the mystery, historians, conspiracy theorists, and restless YouTubers can't help but poke at it. And that, friends, is where we'll pause for tonight. But don't worry, this is just the start. We've barely scratched the surface of the Vatican's dusty doors. Next, we'll explore some of the strangest, pettiest, and downright weirdest stories hidden inside the holy filing cabinet. So, stay cozy. Let's continue our journey. Welcome back, fellow night owls. Or maybe you never left. Perhaps you dozed off for a bit and woke up to hear the word Pope softly whispered in the dark, and now you're wondering if you dreamed it. You didn't. Or maybe you did. Honestly, who can tell? Anyway, let's explore the Vatican's archives a bit more. Remember, there are 53 miles of shelves. You'd need roller skates, 3 sandwiches, and probably a Vatican golf cart to get through the whole thing. But don't worry. We'll just float down the hallway, discussing the strange bits of history tucked away in God's filing cabinet. The papal bull that divided the world. Let's start with something dramatic. In 1494, the Pope effectively drew a line on the world map and said, "Okay, Spain gets this half, Portugal gets that half. Don't fight." This agreement was called the Treaty of Tordesillas, and yes, the original document is in the Vatican archives. Imagine thinking you could just give away continents like Halloween candy. You take Brazil, you take Africa, you take... Oh wait, we didn't know about Australia yet, so never mind. Of course, this didn't stop them from fighting. But the audacity of one old man in a fancy hat dividing the globe on paper, it's pure Vatican energy. A papal bull begging Attila the Hun to chill. Yes, Attila the Hun, Mr. Scourge of God himself. the man who was known for burning entire towns and probably not flossing.
Around 452, Pope Leo I supposedly met him face to face and asked him to stop wrecking Italy. Apparently, it worked. Attila packed up and left. Do the archives hold the exact letter about this? Probably. Somewhere in the dust lies a letter that says, "Dear Attila, please don't destroy Rome. Sincerely, the Pope." It's like the medieval version of "Please don't nuke us." It's pretty incredible. One of history's scariest warlords just listened. It makes you wonder if Attila secretly had social anxiety and couldn't handle confrontation. The trial of a dead pope. Yes, really. Here's one of the strangest stories. The infamous Cadaver Synod of 897. Picture this. Pope Stephen VI was furious with his predecessor, Pope Formosus. So mad, in fact, that he dug up Formosus's corpse, set it on a throne, and put it on trial for lying about being pope. Yes, a literal corpse in court. Witnesses had to stand there, trying not to make eye contact with the decomposing pope while someone shouted accusations at him. The poor corpse even had a deacon as a defense attorney, which must have been the worst summer internship in history. Guess what? The corpse was found guilty. They stripped it of its papal robes, cut off the blessing fingers, and tossed it into the Tiber River. And somewhere in the Vatican Archives, there's a record of this whole circus. The medieval church, less holy reverence, more daytime soap opera with corpses. Petty correspondences, popes versus monarchs. The archives are filled with letters where popes politely, really passive-aggressively scold kings. Examples include, "Dear King of France, please stop raising taxes without my permission." "Dear Emperor, please don't invade Naples again, we just cleaned up from last time." "Dear Henry VIII, stop getting married, it's becoming embarrassing." It's all very per my last email, but written in Latin on vellum with an official wax seal. You can almost hear the scribes sighing as they copied it out. The archives and the Jews of Europe. Not all of it is humorous. Some of the darker material in the archives relate to papal orders regarding Jewish communities in medieval Europe. For centuries, popes ordered Jews to live in ghettos, wear distinctive clothing, or bar them from owning property. These decrees were written down and sent like memos. Naturally, they ended up in the archives because the Church keeps everything. It reminds us that behind the dusty pages are real lives, often marked by suffering, shaped by men in fancy robes with quills. The Vatican's obsession with astronomy. Believe it or not, the Vatican wasn't always against science. In fact, popes hired astronomers to calculate calendars, chart stars, and determine when Easter should be celebrated. So, buried in the archives are centuries' worth of astronomical observations. Some look like doodles of planets that would fit right in on a high school notebook. Other documents are serious records that helped reform the Gregorian calendar in 1582. So, yes, the reason you have to deal with daylight saving time? Somewhere in the Vatican archives is a piece of paper that helped cause it. The weird papal spy network. Here's something people often overlook. The Vatican had one of the most sophisticated spy networks in Europe. Think James Bond, but with more incense. Popes sent envoys to royal courts. Bishops acted as informants, and letters came back filled with gossip. Who was plotting war? Who was having affairs? Who was secretly broke? And yes, those reports are in the archives. Thousands of pages of pure medieval tabloid material. If BuzzFeed had existed in the 1500s, it would have been headquartered in Rome. A letter from Abraham Lincoln. Let's fast forward a bit. In the 1860s, Abraham Lincoln actually wrote to Pope Pius IX during the Yemen Civil War. Lincoln wanted people's support for the Union cause. Pius IX offered a half-hearted blessing for peace, which is basically the diplomatic equivalent of thoughts and prayers. The letter's still there, which means Honest Abe's handwriting is chilling just a few shelves away from medieval curses and papal bulls. The Index, Part 2. Remember the Index of Forbidden Books? It wasn't just philosophers and scientists who ended up banned. Novelists did too. Even Madame Bovary made the naughty list. Basically, if it made people think too much about sex, atheism, or, God forbid, democracy, it was condemned. Ironically, banning a book is the quickest way to make teenagers want to read it. The church essentially invented the hype machine. Napoleon's messy return crates. Let's return to Napoleon because he just couldn't resist poking at the Vatican. When his army looted the archives and carted off documents to Paris, the eventual return was a comedy of errors. Documents came back out of order. Some crates got lost. Librarians in Rome had a meltdown trying to reorganize centuries of paperwork. Imagine dedicating your life to putting files in perfect order, only to have Napoleon show up saying, "Cool, I'll just dump these in Paris, thanks." Then he sends them back mixed with French wine stains. Somewhere in those 53 miles of shelves, you can still find things misplaced because of him. That's perhaps the pettiest legacy Napoleon left behind. Why the archives aren't really open. Here's the deal. Technically, researchers can apply to study in the Vatican Archives, but the rules are strict. You must be a qualified scholar. You can only request 3 files per day. You can't wander the stacks by yourself. And you definitely can't ask, "Hey, where's the alien stuff?" It's like trying to get into an exclusive nightclub, except you find 15th century accounting records instead of cocktails and bad techno. Still, for historians, it's like Disneyland, with fewer churros. The grand illusion. At the end of the day, the Vatican Archives are a paradox. They're famous for secrecy, yet 99% of the material is pretty boring. Diplomatic cables, land deeds, tax records. But that 1%? The strange trials, political gossip, petty feuds, they keep us returning like moths to a very dusty flame. Honestly, maybe that's the point. The Vatican doesn't need to hide aliens. They just have to store their paperwork well enough to make the rest of us go crazy wondering what's in there. And that, my friends, is another slow stroll down the Vatican's paper-filled hallways. In the next part, we'll keep drifting, uncovering even more oddities, lost letters, forgotten scandals, and the kind of bureaucratic nonsense that only the Catholic Church could create. So fluff your pillow, stay comfortable, and let's wander onward. Hey again! If you're still awake, congratulations! You've made it through 2 parts of the Vatican's filing cabinet saga. If you're not awake, that's okay too. I'm just talking into the void either way. Tonight, or rather still tonight, we'll keep exploring the endless shelves of the Vatican Archives. Just when you think it's all papal tax receipts and lists of who owes the monastery 2 chickens, you suddenly encounter some of the strangest pieces of human history ever written. So, let's open some more drawers. Gently. Dust first. A royal breakup letter. Yes, the archives contain royal breakups. Imagine sifting through parchment after parchment and suddenly there's a letter where a king is pretty much ghosting someone. One example is King Henry VIII again. Of course, it's Henry. He was like the reality TV star of the 1500s. His letters to Anne Boleyn before she became queen still exist, filled with "I love you so much, please answer me" energy. It's painfully clingy. If Henry lived today, he'd be that guy who double texts "you up" at 2 a.m. The Vatican archivists probably had to fight the urge to underline "desperate" in the margins. Papal bans on weird things. Another entertaining category is papal bans. These guys banned everything. If you think modern politicians overreach, just imagine the Pope telling you what shoes to wear. For instance, there are medieval papal bulls banning priests from wearing flashy clothes. This is funny because have you seen a pope's outfit? It's basically Gucci, but with more crosses. At one point, popes even tried to ban chess. Yes, chess. Too addictive, too worldly. Imagine a monk sneaking a chessboard into the cloister like it's contraband. Psst, brother, rook to e4. Catherine the Great's correspondence. Somewhere in the stacks there's a file with letters from Catherine the Great of Russia. She wrote to the Vatican trying to negotiate religious freedom for Catholics in her empire. But the subtext is even funnier. Catherine, the face of Enlightenment Russia, writing politely to popes who were still stuck in medieval thinking. It's like emailing your grandma about TikTok trends. Also, fun fact, Catherine's handwriting is beautiful. Elegant swirls, neat spacing, which really isn't fair. She ruled Russia and had nice penmanship. The papal view of America. When Columbus landed in the Americas in 1492, the Vatican got involved almost right away. The popes had to decide who owned the New World. It's ridiculous because millions of people already lived there. Still, papal decrees divided whole continents between Spain and Portugal. Reading those documents now feels like watching kids argue over monopoly property deeds. I call dibs on South America first. The archives even hold early maps of the New World, drawn with all the accuracy of a drunken doodle. Florida looks like a bent finger. The Caribbean islands look like sprinkles. But hey, it was the 1500s. Google Earth wasn't an option. The curse of paperwork. Indulgences. Let's talk about indulgences. You know, the Church's medieval get-out-of-purgatory free cards. The Vatican kept detailed records of who bought indulgences, how much they paid, and what sins were supposedly reduced. Reading them is like scrolling through microtransactions in a bad mobile game. Thank you, Sir William. Your 10 florins will shave off 200 years in purgatory. Please come again. These indulgence receipts still exist in the archives, proving that salvation once had a price tag. The Inquisition files. Okay, let's quietly discuss the Inquisition. Of course, the Vatican kept those records too. Volumes of testimonies, accusations, and sentences. People were pulled in for claiming the earth moves, owning the wrong books, or just annoying their neighbors who then reported them to the Inquisitor. It's both tragic and darkly funny. Imagine being dragged before a tribunal because Karen from next door told the priest you made weird soup on Tuesdays, and that transcript remains in the Vatican Archives for centuries. Immortalized pettiness. Weird saints and their paperwork. The archives also keep odd hagiographies, essentially the resumes of saints. To get canonized, you needed miracles, and someone wrote those down, seriously. So you find documents like, Brother so-and-so healed a donkey with a prayer. Sister so-and-so levitated while doing the dishes. This nun's body never decomposed, smells faintly of flowers. All filed away, stamped, and kept forever. Imagine being the Vatican librarian cataloging that. Yes, miraculous donkey healing, third shelf on the left. People insults preserved forever. Popes were surprisingly snarky in their letters. One pope described another church leader as a little man swollen with arrogance. Another referred to a king as pig-headed. All recorded in official documents with fancy seals. This means historians can read centuries of holy comebacks. Honestly, it's like the medieval version of subtweeting. The correspondence of doomed monarchs. One of the more haunting collections holds letters from dethroned monarchs begging for help. Mary Queen of Scots wrote to the Pope while imprisoned in England, pleading for Catholic support. The Vatican responded very slowly. Spoiler, it wasn't in time to save her life.
Her desperate handwriting survives on those shelves, ink on paper fading slowly but still legible. It's like hearing a ghost whisper from 400 years ago. The world's longest to-do list. The popes also kept registers, huge ledgers where every papal action was recorded, appointments, decrees, treaties, and punishments. They stretch on for centuries, line after line, in handwriting that makes your eyes ache. It's basically the world's longest to-do list, except instead of buy milk or walk dog, it's crown emperor, excommunicate king, ban book. The kind of checklist only God's middle manager could handle. How the archives survived wars. Through all the chaos of European wars, the archives mostly stayed intact. Why? Because even invading armies thought, do we really want to carry 100,000 pounds of paper across the Alps? Napoleon tried, and it was a disaster. Other armies just left the shelves alone. Turns out bureaucracy is tougher than cannon fire. The great mystery. What's still locked away? And here's where the imagination kicks in. Some files are still sealed. Popes decide when certain documents can be accessed by researchers. Usually they wait about 70 years after a pope dies. This means files from the early 20th century just became available. So, what's still locked away? Letters about World War II, for example. The Vatican's dealings with Mussolini, Hitler, and Franco. Sensitive stuff. The kind of paperwork where, oops, we helped the wrong guy, doesn't look great in hindsight. Naturally, conspiracy theorists jump to aliens, time machines, and Jesus' lost autobiography. The reality is likely just politics, money, and embarrassing decisions. Honestly, that might be worse than aliens. Why it all matters. At the end of the day, the Vatican Archives are the diary of Western civilization. A messy, bureaucratic, passive-aggressive diary, but still. They keep the records of almost every major turning point in Europe. Kings rising and falling, explorers carving up the globe, scientists challenging dogma, and people just being strange. And it's all still there, waiting, dusty, sealed, and very, very Catholic. All right, that's enough parchment for one section. Next time, we'll delve even deeper into legends, urban myths, and the truly odd documents that keep conspiracy theorists awake at night while lulling the rest of us to sleep. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let's float on. So let's dive a bit deeper now. You're comfortable, maybe half asleep, and that's just right. The Vatican Archives are not a place for action. They're all about paperwork, endless, dusty paperwork. This is what makes them oddly fascinating if you enjoy watching the slow decline of human ambition captured on fading parchment. Most people picture the Vatican Archives like a scene from an Indiana Jones movie. They imagine a torch-lit underground vault, cobwebs, secret doors, and possibly a few cursed relics lurking in the dark. But the reality? It's mostly long, climate-controlled hallways filled with beige boxes. And inside these boxes are letters, receipts, and treaties. For example, please deliver 2 barrels of salted fish to His Holiness by Thursday. Signed, the Fisherman of Venice. Truly riveting stuff. Yet, mixed in with the ordinary, you find some juicy bits, like letters between kings pleading with the Pope to annul marriages, or bishops whining about pretty much everything. The archives resemble the Vatican's group chat history. Honestly, a lot of it reads like passive-aggressive tweets written on vellum. Now, let's explore some of the notable stories, shall we? First, there's the Galileo affair. The classic instance when the Catholic Church decided science was optional. The archives hold the trial transcripts of Galileo, the unfortunate guy who looked through a telescope and declared, "Hey, so the Earth is probably not the center of the universe?" Spoiler alert, he was correct. But in the 1600s, claiming that was like strolling into a room full of egos and shouting, "Actually, you're all wrong and the sun doesn't revolve around you." Not a popular stance. The Vatican put him on trial for heresy, which makes sense. The trial record, resting in the archives for centuries, details the entire ordeal. We're talking interrogation notes, witness statements, and everything. Eventually, Galileo was coerced into recanting, which in Vatican language means, say you're sorry, even though we know you're right, but we can't lose face. He spent the remainder of his life under house arrest. Not exactly an ideal situation.
But the Vatican isn't just about denying science. They also meddled in European politics like an overbearing aunt at a family gathering. For instance, buried in those archives are letters about Henry VIII's marriage troubles. You know, the guy who formed his own church just because the Pope wouldn't grant him a divorce? The Vatican's paperwork from that debacle resembles medieval divorce court documents. You can almost hear the frustrated papal scribes grumbling, "Again with this guy? Someone get him a hobby." And then there's the notorious Donation of Constantine. If you've never heard of it, it was a document supposedly penned by Roman Emperor Constantine giving half his empire to the Pope. Convenient, right? Like, hey, you know what? You guys should totally rule the Western world, signed me, the Emperor. This was used for centuries to justify papal authority until it was exposed as a total forgery. Yep, the Vatican's biggest legal claim rested on medieval fan fiction. And yes, the fake document is still in the archives, like an embarrassing family heirloom you can't seem to toss out. While many of these stories have come to light, millions of documents in those archives still remain hidden. Why? Because the Vatican decides when things are made public, usually centuries late. This is pretty much the historical equivalent of ghosting humanity until they feel ready to talk again. For example, documents about World War II and the Church's ties with Mussolini and Hitler were only released recently. Before that, people could only speculate. Oh, and the speculation got wild. But the Vatican doesn't really care about your conspiracy theories. They've been hoarding receipts for 1,200 years. If they waited this long, they can wait even longer. Let's now cover one of the strangest rumors about the archives, the notion that they hold proof of alien contact. Yes, you heard that right. Somewhere along the line, people decided the Vatican must possess documents confirming UFOs are real. I personally love the image of a medieval pope receiving a letter stating, "Dear Holiness, we have encountered beings from the stars. They are mostly polite, though their table manners could use some work." Sadly, there's no evidence of this, unless the proof is buried so deep it's guarded by caffeinated Swiss guards with nothing to lose. But let's keep this cozy. Remember, this isn't about shocking you awake. It's about the slow rolling waves of mildly absurd history. So envision endless hallways, dusty boxes, and cranky popes writing strongly worded letters. 1,000 years of receipts, grudges, and secrets piled in organized rows. That's the Vatican Archives. Not a blockbuster movie set, just the world's most exclusive filing cabinet. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, which contains more unusual cases and some juicy royal scandals from the archives? Or should I add more sleepy digressions and sarcastic side notes to slow things down for bedtime listening? So, we've talked about Galileo, Henry VIII's divorce drama, and a forged document that fooled half of Europe. But don't close your eyes yet, because the Vatican Archives are also the burn book of medieval Europe. If a king, duke, or bishop embarrassed themselves, chances are someone in Rome kept the receipts. For example, there's a whole section of letters about the Knights Templar. You know, the warrior monks who were supposedly guarding pilgrims, but ended up creating early banking and getting rich. The Templars were eventually accused of heresy, blasphemy, and get this, spitting on the cross during initiation. The Pope had to investigate, and those interrogation records sat quietly in the archives for centuries. Basically, the Templars went from being medieval Marvel superheroes to that shady club nobody trusts anymore. And the best part? In 2007, yes, 2007, not 1207, the Vatican actually published the Chinoan Parchment, a document that proved the Pope had secretly pardoned the Templars back in the 1300s. This means the whole burn them at the stake fiasco, not exactly official Vatican policy, just another case of medieval office politics gone wrong. Next, let's move to the section on the Inquisition. Ah yes, everybody's favorite cheerful historical event. The archives contain trial records for thousands of accused heretics, people who dared to have slightly unusual ideas like maybe the earth is round or maybe we don't need to burn each other alive over this. Of course, the inquisitors didn't find that funny. And the paperwork is all still there. Lists of questions, confessions, punishments. It's basically the darkest paperwork in history. Imagine an endless filing cabinet of human paranoia, all written in perfect calligraphy. Then there's the Vatican's secret collection of royal drama. Kings and queens couldn't sneeze without Rome recording it. Want to annul your marriage? Ask the Pope. Want to crown your cousin? Ask the Pope. Want to pretend you didn't murder your brother? Guess what? Yep, ask the Pope. The Vatican scribes logged it all. Honestly, if Netflix ever runs out of ideas, they could just adapt one random archive box and get 5 seasons of scandal out of it. But here's the thing. For every famous name, Galileo, Henry VIII, and the Templars, there are thousands of nobodies in those archives. Farmers who wrote petitions, priests who complained about taxes, entire towns that begged the Pope for help during plagues. Their voices are still there, dusty and hidden, waiting for someone with enough patience and Vatican clearance to read them. And that, maybe, is the most haunting part. History's greatest library of forgotten whispers, all locked away behind guarded doors. And yet, most of it will never be read. The Vatican only lets in a tiny handful of researchers at a time. Imagine traveling across the world just to spend weeks in a reading room where the highlight of your day is deciphering someone's grocery bill from 1453. That's the Vatican life. So, as you close your eyes and drift a little deeper, imagine those endless shelves, the ink fading, the parchment curling, but the stories still whispering. Kings, popes, heretics, and everyday people all filing complaints to the same celestial inbox. 1,000 years of voices trapped in paper.
Now, before we dive too deep into the pillows, let's remember that not everything about the Vatican Archives is proven fact. Some things are simply whispered rumors, exaggerated legends, or conspiracy theories that people invented when they grew tired of reading normal, dusty manuscripts. One of the most interesting rumors is about something called the chronovisor. Supposedly, in the 1950s, a Vatican priest and some scientist friends created a machine that could look back in time. Yes, like a medieval Netflix rewind button. The story says they tuned in to the crucifixion of Jesus and even witnessed speeches by Cicero, the ancient Roman orator. When asked for evidence, the Vatican calmly said, "Nope, doesn't exist." That's exactly what you'd say if you were hiding a time machine in your basement archives. Then there's the myth of the Black Pope. This isn't an actual pope in a black outfit, though, admit it, that would look pretty sharp. Instead, it's the nickname for the head of the Jesuits. The idea is that while the white-robed pope smiles on balconies and waves to tourists, the Black Pope supposedly controls the Vatican's hidden power behind the scenes. Is it true? Not really, but it makes for a fun bedtime image. Somewhere in Rome, a chess master in a black cassock moves invisible pieces around the world. And of course, we can't forget the classic rumors about lost gospels. People love to imagine that the Vatican has secret books of the Bible that could change everything. Stories where Jesus had a twin brother, got married, or moved to France for early retirement. The truth is a bit less exciting. There are many apocryphal gospels, texts from the first few centuries that didn't make it into the Bible. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, and the infancy Gospel of James. Yes, some of those manuscripts are in Vatican storage. However, they aren't locked up because they hold world-ending secrets. They're just fragile, awkward, and not exactly bedtime-friendly. Still, it's easier, and maybe more fun, to picture the Vatican as a cosmic hoarder,
sitting on a treasure chest of forbidden truths. Alien encounters, maps of Atlantis, instructions for summoning angels, whatever you can think of. Someone has claimed the Vatican is hiding it. The Vatican, in its usual manner, simply shrugs and keeps the doors closed. Honestly, that's a great way to keep the mystery alive. Now, here's a quieter, sleepier fact. Most of the forbidden books in the Vatican's history weren't really about aliens or lost gospels. They were, drumroll please, boring lists of censored books. Back in the 1500s, the Vatican began publishing the Index Librum Prohibitorum, a large catalog of books Catholics weren't supposed to read. Who made the list? Galileo, of course, Copernicus, but also random philosophers, political thinkers, and even novels that were a bit too spicy. Imagine a library where the naughty shelf isn't romance novels, but scientific treatises on planetary motion. That's Vatican censorship for you. But let's be gentle here. Whether it's forbidden books, lost gospels, or that time machine rumor, the truth is that the Vatican Archives are less like a Dan Brown thriller and more like a centuries-old filing cabinet where even the smallest scrap of paper gets eternal life. It's not exactly Hollywood, but in its own way, it's much weirder.
So as we float deeper, let's picture those secret corners, the locked drawers no one touches, and the myths layered on real parchment. Maybe there are no time machines, maybe there are no Atlantis maps, but there are definitely thousands of pages filled with human anxiety, power struggles, and that age-old Vatican pastime, writing everything down. Now, let's be honest. When you think of a pope, you might see a calm old man in white robes gently blessing people in St. Peter's Square. Sometimes that image fits. But history tells a different story. For centuries, popes weren't just spiritual leaders. They were monarchs, rulers, and politicians, sometimes even drama magnates. Take Pope Stephen VI, for example. He's remembered for the strange event known as the Cadaver Synod. Yes, cadaver, as in corpse. Around 897 AD, Stephen decided to put his deceased predecessor, Pope Formosus, on trial. They dug up the body, propped it on a throne, dressed it in papal robes, and shouted accusations at it. Shockingly, the corpse didn't defend itself well. The court declared Formosus guilty, stripped the decaying body of its robes, cut off a few fingers, and threw it into the Tiber River. Just typical church business. What's hidden in the Vatican Archives? Records of the trial, transcripts, letters, the whole sad, smelly mess. You can almost picture some medieval scribe trying not to gag while taking notes on Exhibit A, corpse's hand. It's easy to think the Vatican might prefer to keep these events quiet. After all, nothing screams holy authority like digging up corpses and having loud arguments across Europe. But the paper trail is there. Every scandal is carefully filed away, never destroyed, because the Vatican has a compulsive habit of keeping everything, even when it makes them look silly. So as you go to sleep tonight, imagine not the polished, smiling popes on postcards, but the messy, very human ones from history, the ones who bickered, feasted, schemed, and even put a dead man on trial. The Vatican Archives don't just hold theology. They hold humanity at its most flawed and most fascinating. By now, you've probably realized that the Vatican's archives aren't just about dusty medieval scrolls and papal family drama. This collection has never really stopped growing. Every century brings another stack of folders, and some of the most interesting ones are surprisingly recent. Let's move to the 20th century. The world was in turmoil. 2 world wars, genocides, nuclear bombs, dictatorships. Through it all, the Vatican was quietly filing things. Take World War II. Pope Pius XIII, sometimes called the Silent Pope, has sparked fierce debate for decades.
Did he do enough to oppose Hitler? Did he ignore the Holocaust? Or was he working behind the scenes to save lives? The Vatican Archives contain thousands of letters from Jewish communities asking for help, documents showing which priests sheltered refugees, and correspondence between the Holy See and Nazi officials. For years, these records were locked away tighter than a Swiss Guard armory. It wasn't until 2020 that Pope Francis ordered many of them open to researchers. Historians rushed in with laptops and notepads, trying to make sense of the paper trail. And the picture is complicated, of course. Some documents show compassion, priests hiding children and bishops condemning deportations. Others reveal silence, hesitation, or political caution. In other words, it's not quite the heroic fairy tale. It's not a villain story either. It's just messy humanity, tucked into folders marked Top Secret. Then there was the Cold War. The Vatican, while not exactly a superpower, held a lot of influence. Communism opposed religion, and religion wasn't thrilled with communism. Suddenly, the Pope was a player in geopolitics. The archives from this era include reports from priests in the Soviet bloc, notes from secret meetings, and even hidden communications with intelligence agencies. Yes, both the CIA and the KGB kept an eye on what was happening behind Vatican walls. Imagine being a Vatican librarian, sorting a letter marked "From Moscow" into a folder labeled "Definitely don't show anyone until 2080. Let's not forget about the Kennedy era. John F. Kennedy was America's first Catholic president, which was significant. The Vatican collected reports on how American voters felt about a Catholic in the White House, how Kennedy balanced faith and politics, and whether his policies lined up with Rome's expectations. Spoiler: the Vatican had opinions. The archives quietly absorb them, just as they take in everything. Even during the nuclear age, the Vatican had its hand in the mix. The popes issued statements on peace, disarmament, and moral responsibility. Behind the scenes, there were memos, diplomatic cables, and endless drafts of speeches that were never delivered. Some likely still sit in boxes marked confidential, because the Church tends to wait a century or two before letting historians take a look. Then there are the files that haven't been opened yet. Documents from the reigns of John Paul II and Benedict XVI are still sealed. This means future historians will have the task of digging through Cold War papal memos, notes about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and perhaps even classified information about scandals within the Church itself. For now, though, those files sit in the dark, quietly waiting.
So when you hear Vatican Archives, don't just picture monks in dim rooms handling medieval parchment. Picture shelves filled with 20th century war reports, letters about refugees, memos on communism and Cold War paranoia dressed up in ecclesiastical Latin. The Vatican isn't just a museum. It's a reflection of the modern world, one file cabinet at a time. Now, we've gone through emperors, inquisitors, kings, wars, popes, and a filing system that could make even Marie Kondo cry. But it wouldn't be the Vatican Archives without the legends. If you lock up millions of documents in a vault the size of a small city, people will assume you're hiding something interesting. Some of the rumors are at least entertaining bedtime stories. First up are the secret Gospels. You've probably heard whispers about this one. The idea is that somewhere under Rome there's a dusty old scroll labeled "The Gospel According to" someone who didn't make the final cut. Maybe Mary Magdalene, maybe Judas, maybe the intern who was really good at copying things but didn't connect with the whole resurrection story. In reality, there are many early Christian texts, Gnostic Gospels, apocryphal writings, but most are already studied, published, and available in translation. Still, people like to imagine the Vatican is hiding some explosive revelation that would change Christianity forever. Something like, Jesus actually loved figs more than bread. Then there's the time machine theory. Yes, really. A few conspiracy theorists claim that in the 20th century, the Vatican obtained a device called the chronovisor. They say it was invented by a Benedictine monk with help from some oddly sci-fi-looking scientists. This machine could see into the past, allowing the Vatican to record Christ's crucifixion as if it were a sporting event. Strangely, no actual evidence of this machine exists, unless you believe it's sitting in a locked box behind 20 doors guarded by people with halberds. Another fan favorite? Aliens. Some believe the Vatican is hiding evidence of extraterrestrial life, a crashed spaceship, an ancient manuscript describing a UFO sighting, maybe even letters between a pope and beings from the Pleiades star cluster. In reality, the Vatican actually has an official observatory because popes historically cared about astronomy. This, of course, fuels the rumors. If the Church is studying the stars, surely they must know something, right? Then there's the big one, the prophecies. People say the Vatican Archives include secret predictions about the end of the world. Some point to the so-called Third Secret of Fatima. This was a vision reported by 3 shepherd children in Portugal in 1917. The Vatican kept the final part of that vision locked away until the year 2000, which didn't exactly calm people down. When they finally released it, it described a bishop in white being shot among ruins and corpses. The Vatican said it symbolized John Paul II's assassination attempt. Conspiracy theorists then argued, "Nice try, but that's definitely not the whole story." And perhaps the most bedtime-appropriate rumor of all is that underneath the Vatican is a giant underground labyrinth filled with treasures, bones, scrolls, and maybe a few things no one's supposed to see, like the world's largest lost and found box. Are these legends true? Almost certainly not. But the Vatican isn't rushing to open every box and prove people wrong. This only makes the rumors stronger.
So when you think about the Vatican Archives, remember, it's part history, part bureaucracy, and part Netflix-level conspiracy. So here's the question that keeps people awake or nudges you into sleep. Why does the Vatican keep everything under lock and key? On the surface, the answer seems clear. The Vatican Archives aren't about hiding world-ending secrets. They are the Church's filing cabinet for eternity. Imagine managing 2,000 years of letters, contracts, land deeds, papal shopping lists, royal outbursts, and diplomatic talks. You'd need more than a basement. You'd need a fortress. And that's pretty much what they built. But secrecy? That's the intriguing part. The Vatican is very careful about who can access the archives. Historians can ask to see certain documents, but usually only after 100 years have passed. So, if you want to know what the Pope was emailing in 1975, you'll have to wait until the 2070s. The Church claims it's protecting fragile documents. That makes sense. Parchment doesn't like fluorescent lights and dirty hands. But let's be honest, the air of secrecy helps them too. By keeping things mysterious, the Vatican almost encourages speculation. If they opened everything tomorrow, many myths would disappear overnight. Instead, they maintain the mystery, leaving the rest of us to wonder about alien letters and lost gospels. There's also the prestige aspect. The Vatican Archives are like the ultimate VIP lounge of history. Not everyone can get in. You need academic credentials, letters of recommendation, and a list of specific requests. Even then, you can only see what you asked for, under watchful eyes, and usually in a special reading room. No wandering the stacks, no poking around in random boxes. It's like being invited to an all-you-can-eat buffet, but only being allowed to nibble on the salad you ordered. And let's not forget, power loves secrecy. The Catholic Church has outlasted empires, revolutions, and several scandals. Controlling information, what gets shared and what doesn't, has always been part of that survival strategy. So when you hear secrets of the Vatican Archives, the real secret might just be that there's no single big reveal. Instead, it's thousands of small reveals, each tucked away in its own folder, waiting for some grad student 50 years from now to dust it off and say, Huh, so that's where the Pope's receipt for 300 bottles of wine went. So here's the thing. The Vatican Archives aren't just dusty shelves of old parchment. They still shape history today, quietly, like a shadow that falls across centuries.
Every so often, the Vatican opens a new section to researchers. For example, in 2020, they released the archives from the papacy of Pius XII, the wartime pope. Historians had been waiting for decades to look at those documents because his role during World War II has always sparked debate. Did he do enough to oppose the Nazis? Did he stay quiet to protect the church's interests? Or was he helping behind the scenes? The files finally gave researchers a chance to sift through telegrams, memos, and correspondence. Of course, the answers were not clear. History rarely provides satisfying endings. It just gives us more questions, often written in Latin. And that's the beauty, or maybe the curse, of the Vatican Archives. Every document opened solves one mystery while raising another. You might find a papal letter to a king, but then discover references to another letter that is still sealed. It's like history's longest-running scavenger hunt. Meanwhile, conspiracy theorists thrive on the unknown. As long as the archives stay partly closed, people will whisper about the lost Gospels of Jesus, potential church cover-ups, or even that mythical deal with aliens. Because, of course, why not include aliens? The less we know, the more wild the speculation gets. And honestly, that's half the fun. But beyond conspiracies, the archives remind us how much human history revolves around controlling the narrative. The Church has carefully preserved its story, choosing what to highlight and what to keep hidden. Every empire, every government, every family does the same in its own way. The difference is that the Vatican has had 2,000 years to get really good at it. So, the next time you hear about the Vatican's secret archives, maybe don't picture a giant glowing box labeled "The Real Truth." Instead, imagine a vast library where every page is a whisper, every folder is a secret half told, and every historian who steps inside knows they'll leave with more questions than answers. And maybe that's the real secret. History isn't about solving everything. It's about sitting with the mysteries, allowing them to drift around you like candlelight, and knowing that the past still keeps its own bedtime stories. With that, you can close your eyes, let the whispers of the Vatican fade into the background, and drift off into sleep. Because, after all, nothing says bedtime like an eternity of papal paper.